Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Program. My name is Marcia Teele, and I am so glad that you're here today. Every week, we bring wonderful advice, some information to caregivers to learn about what caregiving is, and most importantly, how to navigate through the caregiving journey. It's not easy, and if you're a family caregiver, or if you know someone that is caregiving for someone that can't care for themselves, an older adult, then this show is exactly for you. We are live from Boca Raton, Florida, and whether you're listening to us on the local radio or whether you're listening to us live stream on your computer, I'm glad that you're here. The first thing that I'd like to do is visit our Caregiver Community Corner. This is something local to our South Florida area for caregivers to be in the know. And it's not too late if you haven't gotten your ticket for this year's Alzheimer's Community Care There's No Place Like Home annual fundraiser. This is going to be held at St. Andrew's Country Club this Thursday, December 1st, and it is not only a luncheon, but a fashion show and lots of surprises. You know, they say there's no place like home, and of course there isn't a place like home, and everybody wants to be home, and we're going to be talking throughout all of these series about, is it good to be at home, and sometimes when it's better to not be at home when a person is dealing with issues like dementia. So if you'd like to learn more about local services and Alzheimer's community care, and then you want to support that cause, please call them at 561-683-2700 to get a ticket. There are still tickets available, and they would be very happy to give you all the details and all the information. Now, I'd also like to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts, and Arden Courts is a memory care assisted living because memory care is all they do. Arden Courts is a leader in caregiving for people with Alzheimer's or other dementias, and also for caring for their loved one who's the primary caregiver. And what I mean by that is that Arden Courts cares about the caregiver. They have wonderful opportunities for caregivers to not only place their loved ones in a wonderful, safe, secure environment, but they also offer support for that caregiver, for support groups that are invaluable to learning how to deal with issues before and after you make that decision. There are seminars all across the country because Arden Courts has approximately 52 communities throughout the United States to help caregivers. And they offer quarterly seminars where experts come into the community free of charge and give their opinion and their advice and their expertise so that you can learn. And these are wonderful opportunities. Also, this is called the 36-Hour Day Book. This is a wonderful book. It's a guide for caregivers, and Arden Courts would like to give this to you free just for the asking. This is a wonderful book to review, to look at, to educate yourself, whether you're a new caregiver or whether you've been caregiving for some time. There'll be information available in this book for you. All you have to do is call the toll-free number at Arden Courts, which is 888-478-2410. Again, 888 478-2410. Let them know that you heard about this free offer on the Caregiver Solutions Info program, and they'll be happy to take your name and your address and make sure that you get this book mailed out to your home right away. So take advantage of this. It's very important for caregivers to be prepared, and that's why we bring information onto this show, because caregivers seem to go in spurts with what they need to know and when they need to know it, and it's an opportunity now for you to listen and learn. And I'm very excited today that we have a wonderful guest that's coming on to our show via the telephone. She is a gerontologist. She is an author. She is a national speaker, and she is calling in today all the way from Maryland, and she is going to be talking about cruising through caregiving. As a matter of fact, this is her book. It's newly published. It's called Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One. Now, that sounds wonderful. It's not always easy to do. We want to cruise through caregiving, but there are always some hazards along the way. And so right now, I'd like to introduce to you Jennifer Fitzpatrick, and she is going to be talking to us about her book, and we're talking about cruising through caregiving. Jennifer, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks, Marcia. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, I'm so excited that you took the time and you can be with us for this hour talking about cruising through caregiving. I first have to ask you, I know you are a social worker, you have your master's in social work, you're also a gerontologist, but you must have had some reason to want to actually take the time and effort to provide this information in a book form to caregivers. What was the reason that you did that?
Absolutely. Well, you've worked in this field for such a long time. Caregivers are perpetually stressed out. And pretty much every caregiver that I've ever worked with, I've always thought to myself, gosh, if they just knew a couple of things, or if they just tried a couple of small tweaks or strategies, I'm not saying that they would be stress-free, but they'd be a lot less stressed. So I wanted to combine all of these ideas on how you can be a little bit less stressed. And it's not just from my perspective. You mentioned the 36-hour day, which is a wonderful book you're giving out. Dr. Peter Ravens is actually interviewed in this book. Actually, 2 Arden Courts employees are interviewed in this book. There's 24 professionals. So combined with my expertise and my experience and knowledge, I took the resources from 24 professionals, elder law attorneys, nurses, geriatric psychiatrists, and I said, hey, everybody, give me all of your best tips on how to reduce stress if you're taking care of someone you love.
I think that's great. I think that's why this is a good time for us to be talking, because we do the same thing on this program where I interview gerontologists, doctors, social workers, geriatric care managers. And so this is a perfect partnership to talk with you about this, because now someone can have it in book form and carry it around with them if they need information and they don't have an opportunity to listen to the show, or even go on our archive where we interview everybody. So I'm so happy that you're here, because you're bringing such a wealth of information and expertise to this, and I'm excited to talk to you about everything that you have to offer. But so I first have to tell you that I've been reading through your book, and it's very interesting, and I am enjoying reading it. And I also see in here how you're speaking to caregivers in a language that they can actually relate to. Now, you talk about cruising through caregiving. That's the title of your book. And when someone talks about cruising or taking a cruise, we all have this image of going on a big cruise ship, headed to a nice tropical destination where we're stress-free and we're relaxed and everything is done for us. And, somehow cruising through caregiving kind of sounds like a oxymoron. So can you explain what you mean by cruising through caregiving and why you chose to name it that?
Attention with the title, because when you hear the word cruise, you think of simple, easy, relaxing, and people sometimes are startled and they say, cruise through caregiving? What do you mean? But what we're trying to get the attention of folks is, one thing is we use boating analogy to explain everything about the caregiving process. For example, we call the primary caregiver in the book the captain of the ship. And within the analogies of the book, what we're showing is the tagline for cruising through caregiving is not a vacation. We know that. It's not taking a cruise. But with cruising through caregiving's no vacation, but you can cruise more smoothly through caregiving. Whatever you're experiencing today, you can be less stressed out. And that's the whole goal of cruising through caregiving, is for you to take a step back and say, hold on a second, can I really reduce the stress? And the answer is almost always yes. Wherever you are today in the caregiving process, there is likely something you can do, either physically, psychologically, a resource that you can access that's going to make you less stressed as a caregiver. Is it going to make your life perfect? Of course not. Is it going to be like a vacation? No way. But you're going to be less stressed.
Yeah, just like when you come off a cruise, you're less stressed, and you're going to teach us how to cruise through caregiving. And we're going to take our very first commercial break, and when we come back, Jennifer's going to show us how to cruise through caregiving and what that means to us. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's or related dementias and can often make those who care for a loved one feel just as lost. If you're looking for a place that's safe and secure, look to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com.
Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
We are back, and I'd like to thank our newest local sponsor, Right at Home. You just heard a brief commercial about Right at Home, in-home care and assistance. And if you want to feel right at home with having someone in your home helping you care for someone, you'll want to call the local Right at Home representative and ask them about what they can do for you to help for your loved one in the home. Their local number here in South Florida is area code 561-910-1843. And again, 561-910-1843. Give them a call. They'll be happy to tell you all about their services, and you'll feel right at home with Right at Home. And now I'm back with Jennifer Fitzpatrick. She's on the line calling us long distance from her home in Maryland, and she is the author of Cruising Through Caregiving. This book is really going to make you realize that your life can be more stress-free while you're going through more stuff with caregiving. As a matter of fact, it says, cruising through caregiving, reducing the stress of caring for your loved one. And so as we are talking to Jennifer, we're going to be explaining, she's going to tell us how we can reduce the stress of caregiving. So thank you again, Jennifer, for being with us long distance.
Oh, thank you, Marcia.
So one of the things I find very interesting, you use a lot of analogies, in which I do that too when I'm talking with family caregivers. Sometimes with analogies, we can picture ourselves in a different place, but yet relate it to our own situation. And I think sometimes it's difficult for caregivers to actually see themselves as a caregiver. And one of the things that you do very well in your book is use those analogies to explain to caregivers, really, this is what you are and this is what you do, and it makes it easier to see themselves. So I wanted to talk to you about that, because one of the first things that you talk about is finding out what kind of caregiver are you. Now, I just think, like a lot of people, a caregiver is a caregiver. And yes, there are different people that become caregivers. There's spouses, there's adult children, there's different relatives. But you really break it down into, are you number one, number two, number three, different levels of
Right.
types of caregiving. And I think that is really interesting because it helps people to identify their role. So can you go ahead and explain that? Because I find that very, very interesting.
Absolutely. And just to let you know, if folks want to download a free chapter of the book, it's actually the first chapter, the one you're referring to. If they go to cruisingthroughcaregiving.com, they can download the first chapter for free. So in the first chapter, what I get into is the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary caregiver. And using that cruising or boating analogy, I refer to the primary caregiver. So the primary caregiver as a captain, the captain of the ship. Your area where you are, a lot of people boat. Where I am in Maryland, a lot of people boat. And everybody who boats, you know that there can only be one captain of the ship. And when you're the primary caregiver, you're the captain of the caregiving ship.
Right.
You're in charge of that loved one.
Right, because if you
might
have
be the
more than one
husband or the
captain,
wife.
there's usually mutiny or something.
Right. If you have more than one captain, right, you got to clarify who's the captain of the ship, who's the captain of the caregiving ship. So if you're the captain of the caregiving ship, you're usually a husband or wife or maybe a daughter or son, and you're pulling everything together. But anybody who boats knows it's not ideal to be out on the water by yourself as a captain. So the primary caregiver, you might live with that person or you might be cross-country from that person, but you're in charge of pulling everything together. So what you want is at least a couple of secondary caregivers or first mates. And so your first mates might be a sibling. Your first mate might be your husband and your children, your adult children. And they're going to do things. So say the primary caregiver is the person that takes the loved one to the doctor, maybe looks for the assisted living or home care options, maybe helps them out in the bathroom if they're having trouble going to the bathroom or taking a shower. But your secondary caregiver might do things like come over and give you a break. Like your daughter might come over and sit with your husband while you go get your nails done, or while you go grocery shop, or maybe the daughter in your family is that first mate. Maybe she's the one who is helping out taking dad to the doctor. Maybe it gives you a break. Your tertiary caregiver, and I call these your dock hands. So anybody who's a boater knows, usually a captain and a first mate, they can dock a boat by themselves, but it works best in boating if you've got someone on the marina that can help pull you in. And so, when you're trying to dock, especially if it's rough weather.
Right.
And that dock hand is somebody that says, you know what, you need groceries. I'm going to the grocery store. Let me pick up your groceries while I'm at the grocery store. They don't have any they're not working directly with your mom who maybe has dementia or your dad who has a stroke. What they're doing is they're supporting the primary caregiver, or they might bring over a meal once a week, or they might, if they live at a distance, like this is one example of a good tertiary caregiver. You're in Florida. Maybe your sister lives in South Carolina, and she wants to help you out. Maybe, Right at Home is one of your sponsors. Maybe they're going to pay for right at home to come in one day a week. And that's the way that they're going to be a tertiary caregiver. So the caregiving crew, as I call it, that primary, secondary, and tertiary, you want to have at least a couple of secondary caregivers, many tertiary, and what can all these other folks do to support you as the captain of the caregiving ship? Can they give you some support financially, like paying for the ride at home? Or can they give you support emotionally? Can they call you once a week to check in and see how you're doing? Or maybe they're going to do hands-on stuff like pick up dad's prescriptions.
Well, it's funny because in the book you mentioned this, but I will throw this out for the actually caregivers to probably identify with this, where they say, well, I don't need any help. I can do everything myself.
Right.
And they try to do it, but we all know what happens when someone tries to do everything. Usually nothing gets done, all the way because there's just too much to do and it's too overwhelming. And you actually address that in your book because you said, think about it this way. If you went on a cruise and the captain was the only one providing the services and he was trying to navigate the boat, he was trying to serve the food in the restaurant, he was trying to, make sure that you're having entertainment, the captain couldn't do it all. And if that were the case, you'd probably be very suspicious and wouldn't want to go on that boat.
Right. Well, let's say somebody comes to Arden Courts, and let's say, Marcia, you're the only one that does anything at Arden Courts. They would say, wow, how is one person doing everything? No, of course not. You have an executive director who runs the community. You have folks that work in activities to plan really lovely activities for your residents who have memory impairment. You have somebody that answers the telephone. You're the one that works with the families and helps them to figure out if it's a good match. But you go into a senior living community like in Arden Courts, and if there's one person working there, you would say, gosh, wow, this isn't right. But caregivers all the time, they think, I'm the only person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's how it should be.
Right.
And it leads to burnout. And I have a whole checklist in Cruising Through Caregiving on if you are encountering martyr syndrome. A primary caregiver who is doing everything, I would say 9 times out of 10, if not more, is experiencing what we call martyr syndrome. And they're probably going to suffer a lot physically or mental health-wise.
Right, because not one person can do everything. They can try, but they're going to burn out trying. And, and like you say, if you're a martyr, what happens to martyrs? Martyrs usually die doing it. So
that's right.
We don't want to do or die. We want to do and feel good about it.
Well, just like when someone moves their loved one into Arden Courts, it's not that they're not the primary caregiver anymore. They still are. They're involved, but it's not. They're just not doing everything.
Right.
They have a whole, Arden Courts staff or Right at Home staff, for example, they become part of the caregiving crew. They become part of the team for that primary caregiver.
Right. I'm glad you said that because we're relating it like a team, like a crew. A crew is a team, and every member on the team has a specific job, and that's what teamwork is.
Right.
And so I love this analogy of being on the ship and having your crew, which is like having your team, having your backup. It's almost like if maybe someone doesn't boat and maybe they're a football fan. Well, don't you have a second string to help you if somebody gets hurt or injured? And
yeah, absolutely. Those, you sound like you know your way around an analogy too, Marcia.
Well, we're talking cruising, and I thought, gee, a lot of people like cruises, but what if you don't? How could they relate? And I know a lot of people like football. So same thing. You have the coach and you have the assistant coach and you have your players, but players can get hurt. They all have a goal in mind, and you have your second string and sometimes even third string to jump in there and help. So the whole thing that we're talking about is having your team, having your backup so that you can rely on somebody else other than just yourself, especially if you yourself get sick or something else happens where you're not able to do everything.
And there's a whole exercise called the MET exercise that I have in Cruising Through Caregiving that I ask folks to think about everybody that loves you and loves the person you're caring for who's ill. Write that list And, there's directions in the book about this, but just a thumbnail sketch of this exercise is take 5 minutes. Write down at least 20 people who love you, 20 people who love your loved one. And then you're usually going to have overlap on that list, because if you're married to your husband and you have adult children, of course, both of them, the kids are going to be on both lists. But then you're going to write down every task that's causing you stress. What's causing you stress? Is it having to go to the doctors with your loved one? Is it not being able to get any sleep because your loved one is wandering in the middle of the night? Is it that you haven't gotten your hair cut in 3 months because you feel like you can't leave your home? Is it that no one's there to take the kids to soccer because you're always so overwhelmed with taking care of your loved one? Write down all the tasks that are causing you stress or that you would love to have help with. And what you want to do is do a match. Look at that list of people who love you and love your loved one, and then look at the list of tasks you need help with. Now, for some people might say, I really need to paint the family room. Well, maybe somebody who's on that list can paint your family room.
Like me, I like to paint.
If there's nobody that is a good painter, maybe someone on that list will pay for someone to come paint it. And I think we got to remember that a lot of the services that older adults might need, especially those with dementia, sometimes cost money. And it's a great thing for tertiary caregivers who maybe live at a distance, or people who maybe they work full-time jobs and they can't help. Can they pitch in financially? That's always an option. If you can't put time in, can you pitch in financially?
Well, I think that's a good point, too, because, a lot of people that are in a family, they sometimes feel at a loss, like, gee, what can I do because I do live far away, or I only can visit once or twice a year. And sometimes they don't know even how to help. And by doing this exercise that you're talking about, I love it, because especially when you have the overlap, you have who loves me and who loves mom, those would probably be the first people that you would reach out to. Is that correct?
Well, absolutely. I think one of the big things that you want to be careful about, don't discriminate. Don't say, this person is too young to help, or, this person is too far away to help. Don't screen them out. Just let your mind go free. I'll tell you what, I actually heard from somebody that read Cruising Through Caregiving today. It's very fascinating. She's reading the book from the perspective of she's the caregivee. She's the person who's being taken care of. And she sent me a note today saying that she's got actually loved ones who are young, not young, but middle school age children that are helping with her caregiving. And sometimes we say, that person's too young to help. I talked to a family recently whose 13-year-old great-granddaughter created a Google Calendar for the family. So who does what when? That's using technology. That's a great way to utilize.
And kids are great at that.
Yeah. So don't say, that person's too young, or that person doesn't have time, or that person doesn't have money, or too far away. Just write down everyone that cares about you.
Right, because, when you ask someone who cares about you to do something, don't be afraid to ask, because usually they're very glad to do something. They're very glad to have a specific task or a specific chore or something that you need that they can provide. It makes them feel good.
It does, Marcia. And the thing about that is you always have to realize that it is possible that there are going to be people on that list that you ask for help and they let you down. But more often than not, you're going to be overwhelmed with how many people that you weren't expecting to help you. I'll talk to families a lot, and you probably have had this experience as well. This one sister, she does nothing. But when they finally start asking for help, maybe there's a neighbor that they weren't overly close with that suddenly just started to say, hey, I had a mom who had dementia. What can I do to help? Once you let it be known that you're accepting help, I think sometimes people, when someone has a new baby, everybody knows what to do. Everybody says, I'm going to bring a gift. I'm going to bring bring some food, I'll offer to babysit. When you have a sick, older loved one, nobody knows what to do.
You're right. You're right. They either don't know what to do, or they're afraid, or they don't understand. And I think that's a big disconnect there, which I'm so glad we're talking about. We are talking with Jennifer Fitzpatrick, who wrote Cruising Through Caregiving, How to Reduce Stress in Your Life and the actually life of your loved one, too, in the process. And so we're going to take our second commercial break, but stay tuned. We'll be back with more from Jennifer.
Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know, we understand, we can help. Arden Courts. Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know, we understand, we can help. Arden Courts.
At 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
And we are back. And again, I'd like to thank our newest local sponsor, Right at Home, in-home care and assistance. They give care 24/7 in your home. And if you're looking for help at home and you want to feel right at home, then call Right at Home. Their number is 561-910-1843. They're in Palm Beach County as well as Broward County, and they are standing by to answer your call and see what you can do about getting someone to feel that you are not alone, because there's help out there. There's lots of help. There's help from home health, like Right at Home. There's help at Arden Courts, which is a memory care assisted living, who's our national sponsor. There's help from people who write wonderful books like Cruising Through Caregiving. And we have on the phone with us Jennifer Fitzpatrick. She's a gerontologist as well as a social worker. She has her master's in social work. She has many, many years experience helping caregivers going through the maze of caregiving and helping us. And we're talking to Jennifer today about cruising through caregiving and how it can help reduce stress when you know what to do. So thanks, Jennifer, and welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Marcia.
So we were talking about the different levels of caregiving, and, you know, when you decide or when you figure out what kind of caregiver you are, then it kind of makes sense as what your duty is or what your role is. And I think that's really important, because basically what you've lined out in your book is that you've set aside, here's 1, 2, 3 different types, different levels, if you want to call it that, of caregiving, and that lets a caregiver know that, look, you're not expected to do everything.
Right.
And people that try to do everything, you know, we call them don't be a martyr for caregiving. And you talk about that in your book. Can you talk a little bit about being a martyr and how you deal with the guilt? Because I think guilt is a big deal, and I think that's why a lot of caregivers end up, you know, being a martyr, because they feel guilty about getting the help from their secondary or third level caregivers.
Caregiver martyr syndrome is such a problem because people who are caregivers feel guilty even though they're not guilty of anything. And I say to caregivers they seem like they're in martyr syndrome, they don't feel like they're doing enough, they feel like they have to do everything. Oh, I can't go to that party and leave my mom, that would be terrible. Or, oh gosh, I don't want to, consider leaving my husband with strangers, that would be awful. And what are you guilty of if you're thinking of doing that? You're guilty of nothing bad. What you're trying to do is, if you actually have those thoughts about getting some help, you are actually doing something for your loved one, not just for you. Caregivers sometimes laugh when I say this, but sometimes I think that the person that we take care of gets sick of us.
I say that all the time. I said they need a break from you as much as you need a break from them. And, it sounds kind of funny, but it's true.
Nerves. And it's normal. We're human beings. Even the people we love the most in the world sometimes test our patience. And so when you get out of the house for a little bit, or if you choose respite care temporarily with home care or with an art and courts type of community, you're giving that person a break. Sometimes you're really giving that person some independence back when they have other people that you're getting that relationship back of husband, wife, or mom and daughter. But what people feel a lot of times, they feel guilty, and I say, what are you guilty of? Now, if you're telling me that you're starving your mother, then you should feel guilty, right? But if you're telling me that you feel guilty because you need to sleep out 8 hours at night, that's crazy. You need to understand you're a human being. And most of the time, caregivers that feel guilt, they have to remember that they're not guilty of anything.
That's a good point. I like how you phrase that. I think guilt is one of the biggest things that caregivers suffer with when they're taking care of someone, because, some of them even think, I don't know if I'm doing this well enough. I don't know if I'm doing it often enough. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And, they go through a lot of this self-doubt, and then they're going to try harder and harder and harder. And sometimes it's just like a hamster on a wheel. They're spinning their wheels, but they're not getting anywhere, except their blood pressure is going up, their heart rate is going up, and they're exhausting themselves.
Well, you know why I think a lot of caregivers experience that self-doubt? A lot of caregivers, in my experience, they expect to get all of their information from the doctor. They think that, okay, the loved one's diagnosed with congestive heart failure, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, whatever. And they sort of just assume that the doctor's going to tell them what to do. But your time with the doctor is really limited. And, it's great to have a wonderful doctor, and it's great, but the doctor's there to diagnose you, to put together a treatment plan, to help you with medicines or surgeries if necessary. But you've got to do your own research. You've got to, if you are somebody who's taking care of someone with Alzheimer's disease, unfortunately, your doctor typically is not going to have the time to tell you everything you should be doing.
For sure.
You need to seek out the Alzheimer's Association. You need to seek out, like you talked about in the beginning of this program, for example, Art and Courts does quarterly programs where they invite families to come and get information. You need to read books. You need to educate yourself. And another of my favorites is go to a caregiver support group. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of caregivers just assume, well, the doctor will tell me if I'm supposed to do something different. And the doctor can't be your only resource.
Well, in your book, actually, one of the chapters, chapter 11, is entitled, The Doctor Doesn't Know Everything. and that's kind of funny because we all think the doctors know everything. And especially older adults always think doctors have the last word on everything. So what do you mean by the doctor doesn't know everything?
The doctor is not supposed to know everything. The doctor knows a lot, right? So if you go to your primary care doctor, and if it's a good doc, which most docs are good docs, they know a lot, but do they always know about community resources? Not necessarily. Are they going to know where there's a support group, a caregiver support group close to your house? Not necessarily.
Right.
Are they going to know where your loved one should do rehab for, if he or she has a stroke? maybe they will, maybe they won't. And so what I'm saying when I say the doctor doesn't know everything, the doctor is a special, even though if they're a primary or a general practitioner, they know a lot about medicine, but they don't necessarily know a lot, say, about community resources or about what programs might be out there, like VA benefits. So you might want to talk to your local VA about that. You just want to make sure that you're setting realistic expectations for the doc, because we all know more than ever before, doctors are so busy, and we want, of course, they should give you the proper time for your appointment, but they can't possibly know everything. So you want to understand that they can diagnose, that they're going to be able to help you if you have questions about medicine or surgery, or if you're having a medical problem. But a lot of times about resources and finances, for example, you often want to go to an elder law attorney to get help about financial planning.
Right.
You're not going to go to your doctor about that. So the doctor knows a lot of things, but the doctor does not know everything.
That's right. And you're absolutely right about that. And I think that, again, your analogy is you have to add other people to your team, to your crew, for those resources, and find out who can help you with all those specific issues. Because if you are trying to go to one source, you're not going to get either all the information or the right information, and you need to go to different experts. And so you have different people on your ship, different crew that are really better at some things than others, and that's who you want to go to. I mean, on a ship, right? Would you talk to the cleaning lady about what's on the menu and how to fix your food and what's in the ingredients? No, you're going to talk to the kitchen or one of the staff. And,
yeah, exactly.
So the analogy is great all the way through for cruising through caregiving, and I love this because you're getting down to really brass tacks when you say, for instance, the doctor doesn't know everything, but the doctor is one of your resources, but you need other resources. So again, I think your whole push there is make sure you have your resources, make sure you know who your experts are in the different fields that you need information on, and go to the right people and get that information. And matter of fact, not just go to them, but go to them before you need the information, right? I'm sure that...
if we could only get folks to do that.
Yes.
So we want people to do that. Find these folks before you need it, and tour senior living communities before you need it. Talk to the home care agencies before you need them.
Before you need them. Because if you're going to go on a cruise and you wait till the very last minute to rush and make a reservation, all the good stuff is already gone. You're not going to get a balcony.
Exactly,
you might be down on the
right. You want to know what your options are before you really need them.
Yeah.
Don't wait for a crisis. Don't wait for the emergency.
Exactly. Again, an analogy, but don't wait. Do it early. Get all the information and book early. Even if you don't ever even need these resources in your caregiving, you're going to be prepared and have them. Read Jennifer's book. You're going to be prepared, and you're going to know what to do before you need to do it, which is, again, going to reduce that stress for you. And this is what Jennifer's talking about, is the goal here is reducing the stress of caregiving, and that's why she wrote this book, and it's a wonderful book. We're going to take our last commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some other chapters in Jennifer's book that I think you'll find very interesting, and have her give us a synopsis on that too. So we'll be right back.
Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's or related dementias, and can often make those who care for a loved one feel just as lost. If you're looking for a place that's safe and secure, look to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know, we understand, we can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you
Dementia
love
care
needs more
expert
help
on
than you can give, will you be able to
CareGiverSolutions.info.
recognize it?
If you have
Don't
a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
And we're back. And if you're just tuning in and joining us, we're talking today with Jennifer Fitzpatrick, who wrote a newly published book called Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One. Jennifer is a gerontologist and a social worker and has lots of experience and put this book together with not only her information and advice, but also information and advice from many, many other experts in the field of caregiving. So, Jennifer, we're talking about all of this, and I just love some of the titles of your book, or your chapters in your book, and there's one that I'd like to talk about for a few minutes. It's Chapter 5, and it says, think really hard before moving in. What does that mean?
Think really hard before moving in with your loved one. So think really hard. A lot of times people think, Mom has dementia, she should move in with us. Or Mom has cancer, I should move in with her. You got to really give it some serious thought. In fact, I have a whole quiz on if this is likely to be a good idea of moving your loved one in with you or you moving in with them. A lot of people have that knee-jerk response. I think there's still a lot of people out there that think, I'm a good daughter if I live with my mom or I move her in, or I'm a bad daughter if I look at senior living communities or if I look at home care agencies. There's a lot of middle ground there. Some people move in together, you move in with your mom, and it works out beautifully. Other times, it's awful. And I think sometimes people, especially when it comes to dementia, people think, for safety reasons, I'm going to move my dad in with me. And they then go to work and they go to the grocery store and they do all of their usual activities and just make the assumption dad's safer. Well, if dad, for some reason, is a wander risk, which about 60% of people with dementia are, if you go to the grocery store for 15 minutes, is he any safer? No. So you got to really look at what is your motivation for moving your loved one in. And sometimes it works out great. Maybe you've got 5 kids and you've got an extra bedroom and all the kids would love to spend more time with their grandparent. But maybe you have a situation where you're tight on space or it's going to be very disruptive to your children. I think everybody in the household should weigh in. I'm not saying that a child or a teen's opinion should rule all, but how does the family feel about moving somebody in who is maybe they're going to have to share a bathroom with, or they're going to have to not have a playroom anymore? Or I think you have to look at emotionally what's the cost going to be. Also, you look at what physical space do you have space for this person?
Right.
And yes, certainly there can be financial savings sometimes, but you've got to weigh all of it. Does it make sense to have that person move in?
But that financial savings might take a bigger toll on your emotions, or some of the stresses might not be worth the financial savings.
Well, I don't know about you, Marcia, but I've seen couples who have come to, close to a divorce because they've moved an older parent in.
Yeah.
Because there's so much strain going on in the marriage at that point.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at, again, finances are important. We don't want to sugarcoat it and say that money doesn't matter. Of course it does.
Mm-hmm.
But it shouldn't be the only determining factor on should your loved one move in with you. I'm of the school of thought that most of the time, as dementia progresses, you're going to need either home care or you're going to need to move that person into some type of senior living setting because it just becomes too physically debilitating for people who don't have the training on taking care of someone with dementia, the physical training on how to do it.
Right, because if you're dealing with a dementia situation, with your caregiving for someone with dementia, and you're like, well, I get along with Dad, I always have, I'm going to take care of him, but that was when Dad didn't have any cognitive issues, and all of a sudden Dad has memory loss, and he might not remember that you're the daughter, and he might think you're an old girlfriend, and then look at all the problems that are going to come with that you don't even realize could happen. And it causes a lot of strife and a lot of stress, and there's situations and there's consequences to everything. So I really like that you put in there, think hard before you move in with your loved one or have your loved one move in with you. Matter of fact, I spoke to a niece today who has an aunt who's close to 100 years old and still going strong, and she wanted the aunt to live with them, and her husband was on board, her daughter was on board with it, and for 6 months she did it. But during those 6 months, she was telling me all kinds of crazy, horrible stories of what the aunt did that she wasn't prepared to handle. The aunt called the police and told them that she was being held captive in this home, and the police came. Of course, they don't know that the aunt has dementia, and so now they're questioning the niece and her family. Are you abusing? Is this something we're going to have to call in Adult Protective Services?
Right.
So, things like this can happen, and you don't even realize it until you're in it, and then you're like, oh my, what did I do?
One litmus test that I say this is an easy question. Talk to 3 objective people in your life. If you're a caregiver and you're thinking, should I move in with my mom or should I have my aunt move in with us? Talk to 3 friends who know you and say, what do you think of the idea? Give me the truth. Because, and maybe not your sister, maybe not your husband.
Objective.
But ask somebody that's not involved with the caregiving and say, what do you think? How do you think that we would do with that? And it's funny because you'll get thoughts that maybe you wouldn't have thought of. And certainly you can discuss it with a therapist or a professional or the doctor, but ask a friend or a distant family member, say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think? Are there any landmines I should be looking out for? It's never going to be stress-free, of course, but for some people, a major disruption to their household or to their schedule is going to be a lot worse than it is for other people. It just depends on the individual person, and it depends on the diagnosis of the older loved one.
Right, and it also depends on what that person that you're caring for, what they really need, because sometimes we can't give them everything they need. And home is great, and I think, home is where everybody wants to be, but, home sometimes isn't enough, and your loved one might need the socialization of their peers. They might need additional types of stimulation that you can't provide. You can't entertain them all day long. So you have to really weigh that between the pros and cons. So I'm glad that you addressed that in your book.
One other thought about that, look at when you've got a person who has dementia in your home, a parent, a spouse, whoever, what are they doing all day? Are they napping? Are they watching TV? Or do you have a schedule plan for them? Because don't feel guilty about seeking help if that's all they're doing all day. That's not going to be the most stimulating thing for them. But people sometimes say, oh, the only way to do it is she needs to stay home. She needs to be home. But if that person is sitting in front of the television all day or napping, you're probably going to have a lot of wandering at night, too.
Yeah, so, it's not always the best place, even though that's what your heart might say. But if you look at it realistically and go through that checklist and, ask the opinion of other people, because you're right, someone is going to think of something that maybe you haven't thought of. It's like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. And we're so wrapped up in it emotionally that we can't really see the forest through the trees, as they say. So caregiving is hard. Cruising through caregiving can be easier, but even when we cruise, right, there's storms, there's all kinds of big waves and gales, there's a risk of running against a sandbar, and all of a sudden you're stuck. And so these are the things that caregivers should expect going through caregiving, but with the help of your book, you're showing them how to avoid all of these hazards that might come their way.
Caregiving's no vacation, but you can cruise more smoothly through it. Wherever you are today, you can become less stressed.
Right. Now, Chapter 13, we have a minute left. Real quick, tell me about renewing your caregiving commitment. And before we go there, I just want to be sure before we run out of time, if someone wants to get your book, Jennifer, and they want to read it for themselves, how can they do that?
Sure. So it is heavily carried by Barnes & Noble in your area. It's in stock at Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, Boynton Beach, and West Palm Gardens. And if you want to, or of course on Amazon, but you can download a free chapter at cruisingthroughcaregiving.com if you just want to check it out and see the first chapter.
Okay, great. So you can go to any of those places and get this book, Cruising Through Caregiving by Jennifer Fitzpatrick. And just in the couple minutes that we have left, tell me about renewing your caregiving commitment.
Whatever level of care you are providing right now, if you're living with your loved one, if you're going over there all day, every day for 8 hours a day, whatever amount of caregiving you're doing today, it doesn't mean that has to be like that forever.
Good. And that's a good point.
Adjust what you're doing.
Good point to make. So I want to thank you again, Jennifer, for being on the program, sharing your book with us, telling us about it. It's a great book. I think caregivers would really benefit from this. So I want to thank you all for tuning in, for watching us on your computer, listening on the radio. Same time next week, we'll be here. And in the meantime, don't forget, give somebody a hug because they need it, and so do you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not